Okay, it's interesting when you do these sorts of presentations, you don't know the other presentation coming before you, but there's certainly a lot of tie-in. Again, I'm Tom Golden, I'm the CAO in Stony Plain. I was in Humboldt for 6 years, 6 good years. There's a Humboldt counselor in the room. They were the best years of my life in Humboldt. And now I'm over in Stony Plain. So you can see there's, in Stony Plain, we like to have kids eating ice cream. I'm going to speak to you about a couple different things today. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the governance side of our peace officer program. I'll use the term peace officer. That's the terminology in Alberta, but it's, as I understand, very, very similar essentially in how it's being designed here, I think. You can see my council there. They're all smiling. That was taken the day after the election. They're not sure what they're in for yet, so they still got great big smiles on their faces. I'm going to speak to you a little bit about the implementation side, how it works in Stony Plain. And I got some numbers too, but they're not till the end, but I do have a few numbers on what it costs us to run ours. Just a picture of some of our fine staff members in Stony Plain doing what they do on a daily basis. This picture here just illustrates our community and some of the good people in it. What I wanted to do at this point though was give a bit of the background. So Stony Plain started the peace officer program in 2002-2003, and with greatest intentions. As mentioned, the budgets were in place. We all thought this was a great idea. We were going to move forward with it, and we implemented it. We hired 2 peace officers, I believe, right off the bat. And to be blunt, and because it was long enough now that I can speak bluntly about it, it fell on its face. It was a bit of a disaster right off the bat. And I wanted to share some of the reasons for that and then give a bit of an overview on how we got that ship righted after the first couple of years. So we hired these 2 officers. They hit the streets and immediately started handing out a great deal of tickets for both on the provincial statute stuff, but also on our own municipal bylaws. Up until that point, we had a long-serving municipal bylaw enforcement officer, well known in the community, and you know, to be frank, he wasn't the most aggressive on a lot of the issues, a lot of the challenges and violations that were going on in Stony Plain at that time. So when these 2 officers came in, they kind of took our bylaws and took some of the provincial statute stuff and just sort of went from one end of town to the other. Writing quite a few tickets, didn't exactly enamor themselves to the community, and as you can probably expect, our council heard quite a bit about that right off the bat. There's a lot of phone calls, a lot of people at the town office with concerns about why was this happening, what's going on. One of the bigger challenges we had at that point, from what I've been told and what I've heard, is I mentioned a little bit earlier in the earlier presentation, is the council and the administration didn't necessarily take all the time required to really map the program out, to really communicate with the public and engage the public on why it was needed, what we wanted to do with it, and really where it was heading. We kind of, you know, just went all in from what I've heard. We put the money in, we got the vehicles, so on and so forth, and went all in. And not only were the staff confused, council was confused as to where this whole program was heading. We didn't at that time provide a lot of explanation or education about the program, and we didn't do a lot of phase-ins on new bylaws that we had passed, you know, in a phase-in period for enforcement and so on. And I guess what I would say, it simply didn't go very well. It went on like that for a couple of years by the time, you know, it rolled out and these problems were evident and we went through some solutions. So a few years before I got there, I started there in 2010. A few years before that, they kind of got the ship moving back in the direction they wanted it to go. So what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation is just how we went about that. And I guess too, the other thing I got on my notes I should point out, you know, I don't want to start out, you know, by saying it's a real horror story or there's a whole lot of challenges. There are some challenges. Some were mentioned earlier, some of the risks were mentioned earlier, but at the end of the day, it's an absolutely phenomenal program, service that we have in Stony Plain, and I think a lot of Albertan communities have been doing this long enough to really have learned the best ways, the best practices about how to go about it, and I'm going to try to tell you about some of them right now. Okay, so just a quick reference point. So Stony Plain, like a lot of rural and prairie communities, has been around for just over 100 years. I think they had the centennial in 2006, I think there was. It's about 18,000 people right now. We are doing a census this year. That's where we figure it's going to come in out given our growth numbers. It is a fairly high growth community, which presents some of the challenges that our peace officers do have to deal with. Like many of you, we have 7 elected officials. We have about 130 plus staff working in our organization right now. We currently have 4 community peace officers, and we have 1 municipal clerk. So there was a mention earlier about the clerk side of it. So our municipal clerk, just like they do sort of in the RCMP offices, handles a lot of the phone calls that come in, a lot of the paperwork, so on and so forth, you know, to ensure that we keep our peace officers out on the street and in the community. And a little bit on our RCMP background. Stony Plain's an RCMP community. We're located, if you're not familiar, literally just down the street from the city of Spruce Grove, which is about 30,000 people right now. So we have a joint RCMP detachment. We have about 19. They have about 24 or 25. I mentioned we got a criminal analyst there. We have a number of so-called civilian, civilian RCMP employees for information gathering and a number of other things. Okay, when it comes to the council level stuff, this is what we call governance and the governance of our program, and this is where our council really had to do some work if I go back to that sort of 2006-7 years, and certainly they do it on an ongoing basis now when we do check-ins on our peace officer program. So I've got about 30 minutes. I'm going to try to move through some of this quick, but I think these are all available later on in a digital file, I believe. So. First of all, as I'm sure most of, if not all of you in the room, have to understand the values of your community, what's important in your particular community. A lot of that is similar across different communities, but some of it is a little bit different. You have to take the time to understand and discuss amongst your council colleagues and with your community what success looks like in this type of a program. What does in 3 or 5 or 7 years, what do you think success will be if you were to call this a successful program? You have to take the time to map that success strategy, which it sounds just in the first presentation, a bit of a business plan. I'll talk a bit about that. And number 4, very important to our council is the oversight and the reporting of this program. Again, as you get into the provincial statute stuff and you get a little more open on what you can enforce in your community, or even if you step up the enforcement of your municipal side, anytime you're in the law enforcement business, you need to be very clear on the oversight side of it. So the reporting that your peace officers do to council, to an extension to the community, is a pretty significant aspect for my council and our community. When my council sat around and put their heads together and kind of came up with what they felt was what would success be, the first one there, the community feels safe, feels safer. Kind of tough to measure, but certainly if you're a council member and you're out in your community talking to people, you will get a sense if they feel safe or if they don't feel safe. And we define that, not just, we define that as their property. They feel safe that their property is well looked after by the enforcement side, not just as an individual. Another big one for my council was that the community trusts the service. Again, if you're familiar, if you've been in the Alberta communities and seen the peace officers, they look very similar to city police officer, RCMP in a way. It's the full uniforms. The big vehicles, ours have big SUV Denali's that they drive around in, and there needs to be a trust when you see that type of uniform driving around in your community. Our council also makes part of their success that it's the community itself is engaged with our CPOs, that they're out on the streets, that people know them, so to speak, that they're familiar to our community. And fourthly, very important to our council, and I think a lot of elected officials, is that council can easily explain it, explain the service, why, how, who they are, what they're doing, that kind of thing. And I'm not talking the CAO response that can be really long, really detailed. I mean, able to explain it to the public at a hockey game or just, wandering down the street or in a park. So what we did, these are the steps we went through and the things we looked at for our business plan. Again, there's not necessarily a template, as I understand it, really in Alberta either, but we talked about our vision and mission and values. So we have different statements for our peace officer program. They're very similar to what our overall stuff is for our community, but they are specific for the peace officers. When you get into the business plan and that sort of thinking, you have to have an understanding of the structure. I mean, who do they report to? I heard that it sounds like in North Battlefield they report to the fire chief. That's great, whatever works in your community, but you should take some time to think that through. Our peace officer service has a very clear business plan. It's reviewed annually and I don't want to say overhauled, but thoroughly revamped every 3-4 years. It sort of runs alongside our election schedules or election cycle in Alberta. And again, I guess this is one thing I can't stress enough is the reporting, the open public reporting as to what they're doing and why they're doing it and how many times they're doing it, all that sort of stuff. This comes back to your structure and your business plan. Have an idea of how many staff. I know for us, we started out with 2. A few years later, because of community growth, we went ahead and had another one hired. And we have a 4th one hired after that at the same time as when we put in that municipal clerk position. So, you know, you have to give some thought to your ongoing structure, your staff. Is it going to grow? Is it going to be one officer? Is it going to be in some way, shape, or form shared? Depending how that works out. But that's certainly something that needs to be thought about and understood. The training enforcement level, as I understand, again in Saskatchewan, there's a structured program that's a similar in Alberta. There's a structured program like that. I know what we find in our real world or our practice is that as you get into some of the provincial statute enforcement, you may see further training. I know ours go for like overweight vehicle training, off-road ATV, snowmobiles. Nobody rides a snowmobile in Saskatchewan on a town street, I don't think, right? But snowmobiles, ATVs are another one that they get specific training for. So you have to keep that in mind. That becomes part of your ongoing operating costs. So here's 4 things that we talk about when we get into our business plan. We define some objectives. They can change depending on the year, depending on what's going on in the community. But we do talk that through at the administrative level, take it to council, get some input, and go from there. We have an operating philosophy, which I'll talk a little bit about, I think, in the next slide or 2. That's more thinking you can do when you get into your business planning. We sit down and identify different challenges and tasks. Again, every community is going to have its specific challenges. Every community will have its specific challenged sites even that maybe take a little more ongoing enforcement than others. And again, reporting timelines, measurable data. We try to sit down in advance and get this all straightened out so we know where we're going. So frankly, our peace officers know what they're supposed to be doing and frankly what they're not supposed to be doing. But we spend a fair amount of time on that as well. Okay, so this slide, these are the areas of our business plan. So I'll make a few brief comments about this, but these are the things that both our administration, our CPOs, and our council have all identified as the ongoing broader areas that they will be working on and reporting on. And again, on any given year, we will shift from, a little more emphasis on provincial statutes or a little less on, collaborations and so on. Number 1, municipal bylaw enforcement. That's, as you know, that's the municipal stuff, the bylaws you pass, the different things that you want them to be doing on that enforcement. Number 2, the agency collaboration. It's important to our council. We're in a fairly highly populated region, and we work very closely with our partners in the region, so that's an emphasis on working with the City of Spruce Grove and the county that's around us, as well as we also include the RCMP. These people tend to work very closely with the RCMP. Health services that they engage with. If there's an accident, our peace officers are there doing, some of the traffic control, so on and so forth. Number 3, it was mentioned earlier, and I think I've seen some stuff from North Battleford. Part of their success, or early success, is the community education and engagement on these programs is huge. So our council wanted to make sure that it was front and center for our program and service, and that our staff were both aware of that and reporting on it back to council and the community, what they're doing in that area. Provincial statutes enforcement, which was talked about earlier. We do everything from, you know, seat belts, speeding, stop signs, weights and measures, all kinds of the provincial statutes that they are authorized to do, because you know, there are some restrictions on ours. And again, another important area for us in the business plan, just ongoing development and accountability. So that's training, making sure there's, you know, our officers are safe out there when they're on the streets, and that again, they're accountable both to their supervisors and as well, you know, onward up that chain to council. That's how we report. We report quarterly. It's a written report. It's presented not by the peace officers themselves, but by the department head in that area. It's done to open council. It's a public report. You can go on our website and find out exactly how many you know, dog barking tickets they wrote in the last 3 months. Find out exactly how many speeding tickets they handed out in the past 3 months. And it's very detailed, and we do find that it's hugely important for the community to be aware, but also for council to be able to answer questions when they do come. As you guys are well aware, these are very public positions. There's some issues that come up in this area that are near and dear to your community's heart, and it does get scrutinized. So, you know, I mean, our position was that everything is above board, and we will tell you exactly what we're doing. We do an annual report as well, and then, as I would think somewhere along the lines, there are specific reporting you have to do to the province on a whole plethora of items. So, again, in our real world, your people are a big part of this. The people you get as peace officers, the way they're trained, if they understand your values or not in your community is an important part. Again, going back to the first couple of years in Stony Plain, unfortunately, the peace officers they hired, and not necessarily their own fault, but didn't quite understand the values of that community, and spent some time, you know, breaching those values, and we really heard about it. Engagement is huge. They mentioned pamphlets. Ours actually have little like hockey cards with their picture on it and where their hometowns are and all this kind of stuff, and they hand them out to the kids when they go to the schools, and I get them autographed because I know who they are. They sign them for me. Number 3 and number 4 are kind of linked. It's a compliance or enforcement, and earlier I mentioned operating philosophy. And I guess one way to put it is when our first 2 peace officers started, they didn't worry about compliance. They didn't worry about trying to get somebody to understand why you can't park your, you know, your fifth wheel on your driveway with the thing hanging over onto the sidewalk, so on and so forth. They just went out and just, you know, I mean, ticket for that, ticket for this, ticket for that. And in certain cases, they have to. That's obviously, there is an enforcement regulation side to all of these bylaws and provincial statutes, but our council has always taken the position since then that we're more about compliance than about enforcement. Here's a little bit about compliance. Again, I mean, simply put, the vast majority of people do comply. You know, most people follow the rules. Most people don't break the law. Your people, your community need to understand why. Why is this being put in place? I mean, how are you guys going to look at enforcing it? What are we really trying to achieve? Again, back to the first thing, what we're really looking for is a safe community. So how does that work for us? Well, number 4 there, we do a lot of warnings. We do a lot of explanations. Our peace officers will you know, I mean, we're by procedure, basically, we typically don't give out a ticket unless we've given out at least 1 warning, and sometimes even 2 or 3. As you know, sometimes a warning for most people, that's fine. That's all they need to hear. Oh, I didn't even know I didn't have to do that. I couldn't do this. And we also know that there's some that you can warn them 1,000,000 times and they won't comply until you actually do start fining them or ticketing them. The other thing we do a lot of is we do a lot of phase-in. If we're changing a bylaw and it's got an enforcement or a regulatory side to it, we are very clear that, you know, we're adopting the bylaw on June 1st. It won't be enforced until October 1st. And that gives us the opportunity to explain it, to talk about it, to do a bit of the education side. And then, you know, I mean, after 6 months, if you still don't get it, then you're getting towed, you're getting a ticket, we're knocking down your fence or whatever we got to do. When you get into the enforcement, you'll find this is a step up, and your staff, when they go through this training, they will also be a step up. And I mean, no disrespect to the bylaw enforcement side, but these are going to be well-trained, highly skilled people that you will have working for you if you go this route. They are going to ask you for very clear regulations in your bylaws. They are going to want to know that they can go to court and they can defend it, that it's not going to get struck down because of whatever reason you didn't do the homework in writing the bylaw. On the other side of enforcement, ours take a lot of training in mediation and de-escalating situations because they face a lot of difficult residents, whatever it is. You guys know all the issues that go on at the municipal level, and you know, there are some difficult ones out there. And we do all of this to eliminate number 4, phone calls to counselors, because I'm sure you guys get a few of those from time to time about a dog barking too loud or some guys park too close to my driveway. Okay, here's some of the numbers, and here's some of my comment on the RCMP versus the CPOs. So what touched on again earlier, the RCMP, in my experience, with all respect to that service that they provide, because it's second to none in many, many ways, but they do follow national priorities. They will get, you know, I mean, the priorities set out from the national office, so to speak, that they have to be aware of. They will get some provincial stuff that they have to be aware of and be on top of. They will also, if you guys recall, some of you will recall when the Olympics are on, or G7s or G20s or so on and so forth, they can be absconded without really asking you. So that all leads up to, like it was mentioned in the first presentation, the CPOs are solely, clearly, and only working on your priorities, which is, to me, the ultimate benefit. And again, reference to being a little more nimble at the municipal level. We are much more nimble than our friends in the provincial and federal side of things, and we can make those changes and shift priorities very quick. And you can see that response quick. So there's 2 things that really stand out to me at a higher level. Number 1 is the priorities. They're working on yours, which is the best thing about it. And secondly, you'll see some of the costs. So what those costs are, just very quickly, that is a rough estimate for RC officer in Stony Plain. So that's wages and benefits and so on and so forth. Compared to our CPOs, wage benefit of about 100. That's our numbers. That's right outside the city of Edmonton, so costs are relative. Then number 5, although we don't necessarily promote this a whole lot, but our officers are in that area for fine revenues. So you can see the net cost per officer. That's just wage salary stuff. That doesn't include the trucks and all the other operating costs that go along with it. Is about 70,000. Our RC officers, number 1, because it's not necessarily their priority all the time, and we don't put them on any sort of restriction on it, but you know, I mean, their revenues on fines are quite substantially lower than that, almost to, I mean, a couple $1,000s per officer by the time it's all figured out. So those are our general costs. The only other thing I would put in, because I didn't have it on the slide, but I did write it down, we do run our program with the 4 officers, the municipal clerk, I mean, all the costs in, so to speak, the computers, the everything else on an annual basis is about $600,000. So that would cover off, I mean, the salaries, the benefits, the training, the new uniforms, new equipment, whatever it may be, runs about $600,000 a year. Again, we have, every few years we got to buy some new vehicles for them. They can be hard on vehicles. So to keep moving along here, again, what was interesting for me, when I left Humboldt and went to Stony Plain, this was a new program for me. So I do still appreciate the changes. Number 1, this program, although I mean, there's a lot of benefit to it, there are increased complexities, there's increased risk, as was mentioned earlier. Your peace officers, if you go that direction, safety officers, if you go that direction, are able to pull people over. And unfortunately, you know, there's sometimes they're not pulling over the nicest people, and there's an increased risk for their safety there that you need to be aware of. You are now their employer, and you need to make sure they're trained and they have everything that they need to be as safe as possible in their workplace. There's a lot of, you know, I mean, more complexity when you're used to dealing with the municipal bylaw stuff. The provincial side of things puts a whole new level of complexity into it. Number two, this is what Stony Plain found out somewhat the hard way back in 2003, 4, 5, was that the level of change in the community, in our community at that time, was huge, and our community wasn't prepared for it. I think our councillor and our staff at that time would tell you we didn't do the best job preparing them for that change, but that was a real challenge for us. Number three, I've got professionalized service on there, and I won't speak a lot on this, but I will make a quick comment that as they go through this training from the provincial government, I think you mentioned an accreditation or what have you that they're given. And they'll be very clear to tell you if you ask them to do something that's outside their jurisdiction, and they won't do it. They will refuse it. They will say, we cannot do that. We cannot, you know, just show up and, you know, do that type of enforcement. And it's a good thing, but, you know, it is a difference between what, you mean, in some ways I was used to with the straight bylaw enforcement officers. Number four, the last thing there is just a real world challenge that we get a lot of actually, is that when you're doing the provincial statute enforcement, it's a time constraint in that you can end up in court defending those charges quite more than you will on your municipal bylaw stuff. Typically the municipal bylaws may not be quite as high of fines. You know, generally people you know, understand that their, you know, dog was running at large, they just pay the ticket kind of thing, and then off they go. But you get into the provincial stuff, you can get challenged on it a lot more, and your officers will tend to spend a bit more time than they have in the past in courtrooms, and that's not cheap. Again, here's the opportunities. Here's what I love about our program and what it does in our community. We can do our own priorities. It's clear. We can work on them when we want, all day long, if so to speak, if we want. We have the ability to define and set that service level. You know, in Stony Plain, we could have 10 peace officers, we could have 2, we could have 6. It's up to us. You have the ability over time to grow and develop the service. We've been fortunate, our peace officers have been with our community now for quite some time, and they're really getting into that community. We have that ability. And the other one is you have the ability to control the costs. You're not at the behest of somebody somewhere else about what this is going to cost you. You should be able to, if you put the time into it, understand exactly what it will cost you and what it will cost you down the road. So my quick summary, you know, before or as you're rolling this out, define your values. Think about and define what success is for you and your community with this program. Create the business plan and report openly. Again, that's one I think I can't stress enough. It's important that your community is aware of what you're doing with this. That's how you'll get the buy-in, when they know that you're being honest and straight up, and you get back to that trust level with them. And I think we're going to start taking questions right away. Anyway, all that stuff I talked about, again, is basically available on our website. You can Google Stony Plain, you'll find the website, you'll find our contacts and a number of these reports and plans that I've been talking about. Thank you.
Okay, just a few things. When you're asking your questions, make sure you speak clearly into the mic. As I said before, the session is being audio recorded. Secondly, keep your questions to a couple of minutes. We'll try to keep the answers to a couple of minutes, but we do have quite a bit of time, so give everyone a chance, and if you have another question, go to the back of the line and start asking again. So you may shoot.
Just a quick question, that course at Sask Polytech, how many weeks is it or months is it?
The I should have mentioned that. Thank you for asking. The course is 6 weeks long in total. 2 of those weeks are home study weeks. So the course away from home in Regina for the first course is 4 weeks in total.
Ron Toll, City Swift Current. Swift Current and Stony Plain are very similar in many ways in terms of population and governance and the 2 RCMP. Obviously, the community police officer program is not a cost-saving program to the community. You have not reduced the number of RCMP. Do you have any statistical evidence, either of you, regarding increased performance of the RCMP, reduction in criminal code, community safety, anything that I can take back to my community? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have anything with me right now or that I could really, kind of shoot off the top of my head as to actual data, but we do track some of that. Part of our whole program in itself, our CPOs are housed at the RCMP station, so they don't work out of the town office, so to speak. So they have a very close and good working relationship with the RCMP. And I know when I meet with our inspector, he talks a great deal about the good work they do that allows the RCMP, again, where our community is outside a major center, there's some significant drug issues from time to time, and that's where we want our RCMP focusing. So if you want, I can get your contacts. I can find out what we have and send it over to you.
The only thing that I can add to that is that all of our evidence so far is anecdotal. It's not a cost saving. We're not trying to reduce the number of police officers. In fact, that goes contrary to what we're trying to do. It's about populating the right place on that continuum of enforcement, about all the way from barking dogs to homicide. And someone needs to look after all of those things on that continuum. I did mention that in North Battleford, they've managed to move 1 member off the traffic unit and onto a street team to deal with some of the criminal priorities that they have in the community. So that, and we've saw some return on investment already in that case. And again, if with 1 or 2 officers in a community, you may not see that as immediately as they did in North Battleford. North Battleford is unique in the number of officers that they have.
And one thing I forgot to mention, when you approach the mic to ask a question, please state your municipality and your name.
John Quinn, Resort Village of Candle Lake. Just an observation, when you're developing this program, it appears to me that it was developed more for the RMs in some cases than it was for smaller communities like what I'm from, where we do have a bylaw officer, but the cost of running a program for our community might be a little bit overwhelming, where I see where a municipality or an RM, where they've got a number of smaller villages or towns, and it could look at funding the costs so they'd have policing for the entire RM. Where in our case, the way it's set up right now, we'd have to employ a community protection officer, but we couldn't share his resources with another community. Am I correct?
You're right about not being able to share. The RMs can't share either. So if the municipal government that hired them is the rural municipal government, then that's the only one they can work for. So we have that situation in the RM of Lakeland, where there's a lot of conversation years ago about some of the other towns within the district that they wanted to do enforcement in. And the way the legislation reads right now, you're not able to do that without changing your shoulder flash and the picture on the car, as well as probably the ticket. That's the way that legislation is written. And as you know, I'm sure, and I'm not telling you anything secret here, it's at least a 2-year process to open an act and to make changes to an act. There has to be a political will to do that. There has to be a good reason to do that. And there's a tremendous amount of debate that happens before we can change an act. And so some of the things that are in the act, even if I wanted to change them, I might not be able to. And that I say that because I do want to change some of those things. But it's a tremendously complicated process to do that. So as it stands right now, you're not able to share one CSO with one appointment. You could have the same individual, they would need to have their own markings, and they would need to have their own appointment from the province. The appointment from the province is easy, I can do that. But it's the marking issue that's the problem, and that's spelled out in the legislation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kevin Kotzer from the Village of Theodore. He actually asked most same questions, but we're in the same boat. We were looking at one, but we're also looking, we were under the understanding that there was possibility you could share with another community. And what I'm hearing again today, and I was talking to our SUMA rep, that she was under that understanding. So I think the government's going to have to go back and look for smaller communities, because we pay for part of an officer, police officer, RCMP, and if we could have a joint CSO in our region, it would work a lot better instead of us trying to have, he drives down the road, he's got to change his clothes, change the banner on the vehicle, and then go into that community or into that RM. It's I don't know, it's kind of ridiculous in my view.
I don't disagree with you. I think the regional model is something we have to work towards. My direction from my boss is that we'll look at that. But again, it's not a simple process. It's not going to happen quickly. And the cost is the biggest part of that. I mean, the reason that you want to do that. You have to bear in mind, though, that your rural municipalities are vast. Some of them are huge. And so one person doing 3 RMs in 5 towns, nobody's going to be happy. Okay? So you have to balance that with what you can get out. Because now you're in a situation, again, where you're balancing priorities with a bunch of other communities whose priority may not be the same. Maybe they don't have an ATV problem in Theodore, but they do in the RM around it. So now you're trying to balance those priorities, and every time you do that, every time you add a partner to that, you water that down a little bit. So that's something to keep in mind. Yes, it's an investment. I absolutely agree. It's a significant amount of money, and it's an amount of money over a period of time. What I usually say in my presentation is to do with enforcement. If you're in this to raise revenue by writing tickets, you're in it for the wrong reasons. So we shouldn't probably have a conversation about it. So, you know, the offset is something you have to talk about at a budget level, at a council level, even occasionally to your ratepayers about the return, but that ought not be one of your priorities, and it ought not be one of the reason that you get into this program. But I completely appreciate that it costs money, and that there's a whole bunch of other priorities pressing on that budget at the same time. So we're going to work towards that. I don't see that being a short-term solution. That's a longer-term solution, but I can see it happening. There's ways to make it happen now, but nobody wants to talk about those either. So.
Hi, Daryl Olson from the town of Kindersley. I'm the bylaw officer. I'd like to say that I'm really excited about the program. I know that it's in its infancy and that a lot of people will have trouble with it. Me and our councillors are still having trouble with it, thinking that they can recover their costs. And it's something that we're trying to explain, that you can't put a cost on the increase in safety. And that's the biggest thing. My biggest worry is that someone's going to go speeding through town, kill a kid, and there's something I could have done. And by attending a course, by sending your people out, and being able to attend these courses that the province really has gone out of their way to put out. I know that the cost of going to school to become as a highway traffic is about $35,000. So the cost is not much. The problem we're having now as bylaw officers is compliance. We hand out a parking ticket. Really, the only resource we have to make them pay is by confiscating their car. And that's given to us in the Municipalities Act, that we can go and tow their car away if they're not paying. But just about every other province has a way of putting it onto their driver's license. And I'm wanting to know if the province is considering that type of motion.
I would love to be able to say, yes, we are, but I have no idea. It's well outside of my area. I don't disagree with you. I think it's a good idea. I have no idea whether the province is looking at it or whether there's any kind of direction from anyone to do that. I can say that this group are one of Saskatchewan's 2 big lobby groups for things like that. So if that's important to SUMA, then make it important to government, and again, make them have a conversation about that kind of thing. Thank you for your comments about the program. One thing I should also say is a significant amount of this return on investment and increased safety in the community has to be taken on faith. You'll never know that you prevented an accident. You'll never know that you prevented a death. You'll never know that you prevented a serious injury. but that's something that we have to take on faith. And some of my other programs have to do with traffic services, and that's something we talk about there too, is we have to take some of this stuff on faith. A reduction overall means a reduction in specific terms as well. So well said, thank you.
Larry Heon from the Village of Loon Lake. You probably heard of the organization NODCA. We're presently looking at this security system, but we went joint for a bylaw officer, and one man for our whole area did make a big difference. In fact, one RM voted him out just because all the farmers were scared of the warnings of the tickets that they may get. That's how much one person will make a difference in an area. And that's 3 RMs and 4 villages.
Thank you very much for that. I was aware of NODCA, and I was aware that you had contracted that bylaw service out, and I'm glad to hear that it's had an impact. I'm not very happy to hear that somebody voted them out, though, but you don't want them to be afraid. But that's some, you know, the farmers and the overweight trucks and stuff, and there are many farmers in the room, I'm sure, is something we've talked about with RMs, even when I was with the RCMP doing in the conversation about enhanced policing service. And that's something we'll have a conversation about as community and the province when the time comes. But that's about selective enforcement, and we're not doing that. That's not going to happen. We're not going to direct our guys to do that. If you have a bylaw and you want them to enforce it, then they're going to enforce it for everybody. They have to. Or else you'll lose some of that public trust. So that's important to remember, that you're in or you're out in terms of those things that you want them to enforce. So thanks. I appreciate that.
Hi, I'm Brian Giroux, Mayor, Town of Rosetown. We've had our special constable, as you know, for quite a while, part of the process. I think that a couple of things I'll share with the audience is that revenue-wise, I would count on virtually zero, as has been said. Compliance is going to be the main goal, and that's sort of where we're at. We have very little revenue. The other thing, we felt we had a great need for this type of service, being on Highway number 7. Lots of high traffic going through our town at a high rate of speed. Kindersley probably witnesses the same thing. Semis parking along the highway, and people having to pull right out past them to get back onto a national highway. Very, very unsafe. We've curbed the semi-parking because we can actually just take a picture of them and send them a ticket, so that solved that. And that word got around pretty quick. But the speed one has been a major concern. We actually bought a radar gun for our special constable because that's what he needed. And then without the ability to communicate with the RCMP, he really has wrote very few tickets because it's very dangerous. As you said, you never know who you're stopping. So up till now, we've had no way, for that radio contact. So that's a very major problem, and as you said, that has to be addressed in this new program. So that's just a couple of things that I think people should look at going into it. That's some of the experiences we've had. It's proven very well for us, but we're not sure now how the new program is coming down, whether our guy's grandfathered in or out the door, or whether he needs training. So there's a lot of questions that aren't answered yet. So, but we've definitely, I'd say don't count on revenue from it because we're small communities, and it's mostly warnings and just telling people that you can't do that. Oh, okay, I didn't understand that. So that's a couple of things.
Good, thank you very much. You and I should chat afterwards privately about that. I wanted to say about compliance versus enforcement. It's very difficult to report on compliance. And I'm sure Tom can attest that it's easy to give you a stat and a revenue associated with enforcement, with writing a ticket. It's less simple and more difficult to explain compliance. So have a plan for that when you go into it. So that's going to be a big part of the CSO's job, is ensuring compliance. Your CSO has to take notes first of all, to say I talked to John Smith on this day about this thing, and then he needs to report that to council or to his boss and to council and to the ratepayer. And so that's a little bit more complicated than a stat. Stats are easy. Enforcement's easy to report. This other stuff is more important and consequently more difficult to report. There was a comment about the CSO saying no, and our training, that's one of the things that we'll tell them. The CSO gets to say no, and there's a lot of training about de-escalation and disengaging and that kind of thing. But mission creep is a huge consideration. Alberta had to rewrite their whole legislation to clear that up. We hope we don't have to do that by paying a lot of attention to mission creep right off the hop. And so your CSOs will be trained to pay attention to mission creep, and then the communities also will be trained to pay attention to mission creep. They're not the police. We don't want them doing police work. The police will try and suck them into that. Oh, and I'm on tape saying that too, aren't I? Damn. I forgot about the recording. The police will try and suck them into that, and don't let that happen. It's just, it's easy. If you get a superstar for a CSO, they're going to want to get them engaged in other things. And the CSO is going to want to get engaged in other things. That's natural human behavior. But as communities and risk managers, we need to pay attention to that and prevent that from happening to a great degree. Sorry to take away your thunder. Go ahead.
Rick Aikman, Town of Kamsack. Are you planning on coming out with a uniform that will be uniform to the province? Maybe advertised by the province, that so we know that this person in this uniform, whether it's in Kindersley or in Kamsack, is a bylaw enforcement officer, you know, such as, well, the city police have their uniform, the RCMP have theirs, etc., and you can identify the man in the uniform or the woman in the uniform, whichever the case happens to be.
Not specifically, but there's very little room left in the continuum. There's very little room left in the look of an enforcement uniform. You can't have yellow, you can't have red. Right?
Green is the color.
Right, green is the color. Light blue, gray and light blue really are where you're at. We decided at a ministry level not to dictate what the uniform should look like, but the Police Commission has some pretty specific rules about what it can look like, really. It can't look like the police, even though it kind of does look like the police. And it clearly marked as a CSO, not the police. The word police can't appear. We discourage the use of enforcement in the logo. We want special constable. We're kind of saying, nah, we'd rather you call him a CSO. And that's all branding. That's all making sure that we're all on the same page. We have the same look, similar responsibilities, similar levels of enforcement for the community safety officers that are special constables. So are we going to create a provincial uniform? No. But there will be a consistent look to those uniforms based on the fairly strict rules or fairly tight rules we have for what they can look like.
The other thing I was going to ask was occupational creep or situations such as he pulls a truck over to weigh it and he finds out now he's got an impaired driver and it can escalate from there. What are you teaching your police or your peace officers to do in such a, I know the police could be in some places a half an hour away. What are you instructing your bylaw enforcement officers to do in such cases?
If he's only half an hour away, he's pretty close.
I got a couple answers or comments on that, and I think you can try it too. Just on the uniforms, the one thing I can tell you in Alberta on the visibility side, you can tell the difference pretty clearly between the peace officers and the RCMP or the city police. But it is a bit of a challenge to tell the difference between the Stony Plain peace officer and the Parkland County or even the Spruce Grove peace officers. And again, that comes back, I mentioned the stuff about trust because, I mean, ours are in the big Denali's, you know, with the light rack, you know, I mean, pretty similar to an RCMP light rack. And so, you know, I mean, the branding side is an interesting side of it.
They're going to call the police. Go, stay. In answer to your question about what do you do when you pull a truck over for weight and you put the scales under and realize he's impaired, got to call the police. There's nothing you can do about it. And that I agree that handcuffs you, but once you start getting into that, where do you stop? We're not giving CSOs or the special constables that result from CSO training any enhanced arrest ability or authority. So they'll have what you and I have. They won't have any enhanced ability to arrest people. We're not giving them any of that. We're not going down that road, not yet. And that goes specifically to risk management and specifically to mission creep. That's the police's job. We're going to ask them to disengage. If they pop somebody with the radar and they hit the lights and the guy accelerates, you're done. Hopefully you got the license plate number and you can call the police, but you're out of it. We can't have you pursuing people. That just can't happen. We're not trained to do that. Go ahead, sorry.
Thanks, Hugh. I think you just spoke to what I'm thinking, what's going through my mind. I'm Councillor Smith from the City of Estinac. I think the application of the CSO is to possibly, in cases of growth, we've expanded our police force in the last 10 years from 16 to 26. Just this year we've seen crime drop a little bit. And if the trend it continues to be crime dropping over the next decade, which would be wonderful, also our population growth has slowed, if not decreased, just recently. So the purpose of this application is to possibly lessen the burden of cost on municipal policing by reducing the amount of full-fledged officers and increasing the amount of these CSOs. However, if they're not clearly uniformed very much differently, they become, they look all alike to me. You know, so I think the ministry should rethink that thought, because if I'm not going to have a gun or other methods of protecting myself when I'm stopping vehicles and stuff like that, yeah, I might have a little bit of intelligence and they might tell me that maybe you better not bother to stop this person or just let them go. But I mean, I really think you need to rethink that uniform kind of thing, because I would like someone that doesn't have the ability to protect himself clearly different.
I appreciate that, thank you. And I will comment a little bit back on what you said in terms of reducing the number of officers. That's not the goal. But potentially reducing the number of increase that you need. So you said you've increased 10 over the last few years. Maybe with CSOs in place it would have been a couple fewer than that. It's difficult to say, but it really depends on what you're asking them to do. And you're getting a better service in the continuum when you include all of those. Your departmental special constables, provincial special constables, and full-fledged officers, you're getting more return on your investment, better bang for your buck. You're getting a better product. And does it cost a little bit more? Yeah, it does. But what's the cost of not doing it? That's something you have to consider too. So thank you.
Doug Robertson, town of Cutknife. We share a bylaw officer with another 3 communities, and the only way this community police officer thing is going to work for us is for us to be able to share with different communities. So we've got a director here from SUMA. I was just wondering what SUMA had done to maybe try and change this law so we can share with different communities.
I'd like to call on Randy Golden, please. We've lobbied, and as I said, we've sat on that committee since inception in building this program. Now, I guess the function of SUMA is to lobby, you know, and we do that. And we agree that also in a lot of the points that were made here today, but it's hard to change legislation and hard to do that because that's beyond our control. Like I say, we can lobby along with SARM. The original intent was the regional or the group joint having a bylaw officer with your neighboring RM or village or something like that, and we still will lobby for that. I guess the big thing was to get the program designed and get it rolled out, and then, you know, one can lobby to make more changes because we really didn't know what was going to be presented out there. So it's not something that I don't think that as SUMA or as a director in the Southwest who is interested in this program also, are going to let lie. But even for us, like say as the town of Maple Creek with the bylaw officer, we do not have the money to do it. We have a bylaw officer, we have all that, but we have looked at the benefits part of it. And I will honestly say that as Mayor of Maple Creek and Town Council, we're going, what are the benefits going to be? Is there that much of a danger that we need our bylaw officer, we need to go spend, say, $50,000 to get him to be able to write a speeding ticket and a stop sign ticket when we have 8 RCMP sitting down at the office that we're paying $200,000 a year for? So, I mean, we're still tossed back and forth with that too, and going, well, is it that much of a problem? Like, really, it's not. Our bylaw officer goes and sits in the school zones, people slow down. That's the thing, you know, they respect that part of it anyways, and, you know, it's, if they're speeding or if they're not going through stop signs, she'll sit at the 4-way stops at lunchtime or something, and, you know, and they still will. They will slow down, and the odd time the RCMP will go sit there too. So, but it's something that we definitely, you know, I guess regionally, I'd like to see it to be regional too, because for a lot of the smaller communities that are out there, why can't you have a regional outlook instead of like just a community one? So they can do the, you know, even if you did 2 or 3 RMs that each have a small town in them, and call it a regional CSO program. But it's something that we're all going to have to work together on, and that's the idea of SUMA. I mean, we will keep working, we'll keep lobbying. I'd like to mention also that the town of, City of North Battleford dropped some pamphlets off up here. They just have some slight overview pamphlets of their program and pictures of their vehicles and uniforms and whatnot. They're free for the taking here, and thank you to whoever dropped them off. Do you have another question? And then we'll have to cut it off here at 2:30.
Okay, Don Eckel, Village of Goodsall. I'm also part of the NODCA group, or that Larry was in, and our bylaw officer is not paid by the villages, it's paid by NODCA. So could we do that with our peace officer also? Because there's no way we can afford one for the Village of Goodsall, but we can with NODCA.
The legislation specifically says municipality.
Okay.
So if you're a municipality, good to go. By definition, under the Municipalities Act is what it says. So if you were, you're fine, and I don't believe you are, NODCA. So, but these whole regional things are developing, right? Regional economic committees, regional cooperation committees. Your NODCA group is probably as close to a collaboration as we get in that regard, and so they're moving ahead, and the province is thinking progressively about what can we do to address that as well from a policing perspective. Again, I don't expect it to happen soon, but no is the answer to your question, unfortunately. I have some little packages here. I only brought 15 of them because I wasn't expecting 400 people to show up. I apologize. I didn't think I was quite that riveting of a speaker. But I can see a couple of guys in the audience that have heard me a couple of times before, and they keep coming back, so I guess I am. But if you're, as a community, you believe you're super serious in getting into this right away, I have a little package here of information about what it takes to become an authorized employer, and those are really good points for going back to council and talking about as a group to see if you're willing to live up to those things, if you can do those things. You know, if you're only starting to talk about it now, you're probably too late for the February course. But again, based on interest, we'll have another course sooner than later. So if you're interested, by all means, come and get my card and get a little package from me. It's an excerpt from the policy, actually, so it's a little boring to read. If you're having trouble sleeping, you can read it. But it's pretty short as well. So thanks, everybody, for your time today. I appreciate the turnout.
And actually, there's a repeat session in 15 minutes, starting at 2:45 in, I believe, Salon E. If you want to sit through it and ask some more questions or hear the presentation again. And thank you.